White heavy checkmark disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction inspired by real-life rumors and urban legends. It is meant for entertainment purposes only and does not claim to represent actual events or individuals. Any similarities to real people, living or dead, are purely coincidental. Some content may be unsettling to sensitive viewers. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. The yacht was a legend in itself long before the whispers of hauntings began. Once docked in the sunny harbors of California, it had been the pride and joy of a towering figure from Hollywood's golden age, an actor known to fans and tabloids simply as the Duke. Built in the late 1940s, the vessel was a 120-foot floating palace of old-world charm, outfitted with rich mahogany wood, gold-plated railings, and velvet-lined lounges. During its prime, the yacht was synonymous with excess, mystery, and glamour. It wasn't just a boat, it was a moving stage where scandals were born, secrets were buried, and the boundaries of stardom were pushed behind closed cabin doors. The Duke, a towering presence both on and off-screen, was known for his commanding voice, larger-than-life persona, and fierce desire to control his world. On land, he was a box-office titan. At sea, the yacht was his fortress, one he guarded jealously. It was here that he threw opulent parties, entertained political figures, seduced starlets, and hosted fellow celebrities deep into the night. Some claimed that if you hadn't partied on the Duke's yacht, you weren't truly famous. But there was something more to his obsession with the vessel. While others saw it as a symbol of luxury, he treated it almost like a temple, one that housed not only memories, but something deeper, more sacred, or perhaps more sinister. Rumors began circling even before the Duke's death. Staff members who worked aboard the yacht spoke in hushed tones about rooms that were off-limits and late-night rituals where the Duke would burn incense, chant foreign words, and lock himself away for hours. Some suggested he had become obsessed with aging and the fear of death, turning to the occult in a last-ditch attempt to preserve his youth, power, or even his soul. It was said that he believed the yacht had energy, a spiritual essence that, if harnessed properly, could grant him a form of immortality. These were stories, of course. Tales told by superstitious deckhands and over-imaginative reporters. But they took on new meaning after what happened. In the late 1970s, the Duke was found dead in his master cabin. The cause was listed as a sudden heart attack, but those closest to him noted that he had been in perfect health just hours earlier. Oddly, the yacht had been docked and empty at the time, no party, no guests, just the Duke and a skeleton crew. According to the official report, his body was discovered alone, the cabin door locked from the inside, with the power mysteriously cut across the entire yacht at the time of death. The media spun it into a tragic farewell of a Hollywood legend. But those who knew the Duke better, or thought they did, felt there was more to the story than anyone dared to say aloud. After his death, the yacht fell into disrepair. His estate kept it docked in a private shipyard, with no one allowed on board for decades. Over time, stories began to emerge of strange noises, shadowy figures seen through portholes, and voices echoing across the empty decks late at night. The harbor workers began referring to it as the dead man's vessel. Some believed the Duke never truly left it. By the time Carter Langston, a tech millionaire obsessed with Hollywood history, purchased the vessel in 2023, the yacht was in near ruins. Most saw it as a foolish vanity project. But Carter was determined to restore it, not just as a relic of the past, but as a high-end charter experience for the ultra-rich. He believed that beneath the layers of decay, there was a timeless beauty worth preserving. He brought in the best restoration experts, historians, and artists, including a woman named Vanessa, an interior designer known for reviving forgotten spaces. From the beginning, Vanessa felt something was off. Not frightening exactly, but unsettling. As if the walls remembered too much. And they did. Because this wasn't just a yacht. It was a mausoleum. A floating tomb with a past soaked in glamour and death. And somewhere beneath the polished wood and gleaming brass, something waited in the silence. Watching. Listening. Refusing to let go. Carter Langston was the kind of man who could afford to chase ghosts, not the literal kind, but the kind tied to fame, mystery, and nostalgia. A self-made tech billionaire in his late 30s, Carter had grown up watching black and white films with his grandmother. She spoke often of the golden age of Hollywood, when actors were gods and their lives seemed larger than life. Carter inherited that obsession. So when he discovered that the Duke's legendary yacht was up for silent auction, hidden under layers of debt and legal red tape, he didn't hesitate. He bought it, sight unseen. The yacht, now renamed the Majesty, had been docked in a private harbor in Long Beach, California, for over 4 decades. Covered in rust, stripped of electronics, and crawling with saltwater decay, it was hardly the beacon of glamour it once was. But Carter saw past the damage. To him, this wasn't a restoration, it was a resurrection. He envisioned it as a boutique luxury experience, a floating museum meets vacation cruise, where the rich and curious could sip champagne in the same lounge where the Duke once held court. He hired a restoration crew, engineers, maritime historians, and artists to bring his dream to life. Among them was Vanessa Shaw, a talented interior designer with a reputation for reviving haunted, historic properties, though she never admitted to believing in spirits herself. Carter brought her on board specifically for her aesthetic instincts and sensitivity to energy. He wanted the yacht to feel authentic, not sterile, something that paid homage to its ghostly past while offering modern indulgence. Vanessa was skeptical at first. The ship had a strange presence the moment she stepped aboard. It wasn't fear, exactly, it was weight, like the air was thicker, heavier. As if it remembered things she couldn't see. From the start, the restoration didn't go smoothly. The crew joked that the yacht didn't want to be fixed. Tools would vanish overnight. Lights would blow out even after brand new wiring was installed. One welder claimed he heard someone whispering his name from inside a locked storage room. Another refused to come back after he said he saw someone in a tuxedo staring at him from the engine room mirror, only to turn and find no one there. Carter laughed off these incidents as stress or maybe even part of the charm. Vanessa, however, began documenting everything, more out of curiosity than fear. The problems became harder to ignore. Cold spots would appear suddenly, especially in the Duke's former quarters. The air in the master lounge would sometimes smell faintly of cigar smoke, even though smoking had been banned on board since the project began. More than one worker reported hearing footsteps above deck when everyone was accounted for below. Carter installed security cameras throughout the yacht, hoping to catch vandals or pranksters. But the footage often glitched, showing static or blackouts during the most active hours. One video, however, showed something unsettling, a faint, flickering silhouette moving down the hallway just past midnight, stopping to look directly at the camera before vanishing mid-step. Despite all this, the team pushed forward. By the 3rd month, the ballroom had been restored to its former glory, complete with vintage chandeliers, red velvet curtains, and a custom-built bar that matched the original 1950s design. Vanessa felt proud of the work, yet she also felt increasingly watched. She began to sense a presence, particularly when she was alone. One night, while working late sketching out cabin layouts, she heard a voice, low, gravelly, and unmistakably male, murmur her name. When she turned, no one was there. Her tools had been moved. Her sketch was smeared. It wasn't until she visited the ship's old library, now being converted into a cigar lounge, that she found something truly chilling, an old, water-damaged photograph wedged behind a loose floorboard. It showed the Duke himself, sitting in the same room, wearing a captain's jacket and staring at the camera with a strange intensity. What struck Vanessa most was the setting sun in the window behind him. It was almost identical to what she'd just seen that very evening. The same glow, the same shadows, the same eerie quiet. She slipped the photo into her folder without telling Carter. Something about the look in the Duke's eyes unnerved her. There was no smile, no charm. Just a challenge, as if daring whoever found the photo to try and take what was his. From that moment on, Vanessa felt the yacht wasn't being restored. It was being awakened. And whatever had been asleep inside it for all those years was starting to stir. It was nearly midnight when Vanessa found herself alone on the yacht again, sketching design notes under the dim glow of a desk lamp in the captain's quarters. The rest of the crew had gone home hours ago, but she couldn't sleep. Something about the yacht had hooked her deeply. Maybe it was the history, maybe the mystery, or maybe something far more personal. She was beginning to feel strangely tethered to it, like each plank of wood held stories only she could hear. She didn't yet know that this night would change everything. The captain's quarters had just recently been cleared of debris and sealed water damage. Carter had plans to turn it into a VIP guest suite, keeping much of the original woodwork intact. Vanessa had been studying old floor plans and trying to design around the original elements when a draft of air rolled across her neck. The windows were sealed. The vents weren't operational yet. Still, it felt like someone had passed just behind her. She stood, scanning the room. Nothing. Just the faint creaking of the hull shifting with the tide. Shaking it off, she turned back to the old captain's desk and resumed sketching. But then, something caught her eye in the small mirror mounted above the dresser. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, was standing in the far corner of the room. She spun around instantly, heart racing. But the corner was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees in seconds. She stared at the mirror again. No figure now, just her own pale reflection. Her hand trembled slightly as she set her pencil down. Was it exhaustion? Her imagination? She reached for her phone to check the time. 12:06 a.m. Vanessa decided to take a short break and clear her head. As she stepped out into the hallway, she hesitated. Something made her turn back to the captain's quarters for one last glance. That's when she saw it again. Through the window reflection in the corridor glass, just for a second, a man was standing in front of the desk where she had just been sitting. But this time, she noticed more details: the old-style jacket, the slicked-back hair, the unmistakable shape of a cigar clenched in the man's hand. She turned back immediately, storming into the room, but it was completely empty. No cigar smell. No footprints. Just silence. But something had changed. The old photo she had found earlier, the one of the Duke in the same room, was now sitting on the desk, face up. She had locked it away in her folder in her cabin. No one else had access to it. Her heart thudded in her chest. She picked it up slowly. The man in the photo was sitting in the same chair she had been using earlier, his hand on the desk in the exact same position hers had been. His expression was stern, intense, unforgiving. The light overhead began to flicker. Vanessa backed out of the room slowly, clutching the photo. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she stayed awake in her cabin, reviewing the footage from the small GoPro she had set up earlier to record time-lapse shots of the restoration work. Around midnight, the footage glitched, just for a few frames. But when she slowed it down, she caught a shape walking across the background. It wasn't clear, but it was distinctly humanoid. What made her stomach drop wasn't just the shape, but the fact that it paused and turned its head toward the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. Vanessa didn't know whether to tell Carter. He was already brushing off the crew's complaints as superstition. But she also couldn't ignore what she saw. Something or someone was inside the yacht. And it wasn't just haunting the space. It was reenacting moments, holding memories, occupying rooms as if it had never left. That night, Vanessa began keeping a journal. Not a design notebook, something separate. A place to write down everything she saw, felt, and heard. Because she had a sinking feeling this wasn't a one-time encounter. It was just the beginning. And whoever she had seen, whatever she had seen, wasn't done with her yet. Vanessa couldn't get the shadow figure out of her head. It wasn't just the sighting itself, it was the eerie familiarity of the posture, the way he stood so confidently, as if he still ruled over the yacht. As she continued her work, she began to dive deeper into the Duke's past. She wasn't doing it for fun anymore. She needed answers. Carter had kept a small trove of memorabilia and old newspapers on board, hoping to use them for marketing once the yacht reopened. Vanessa sifted through yellowed pages, faded photographs, and a stack of old captain's logs she found in a sealed drawer. What she discovered was far more disturbing than anything she'd expected. The Duke had always been an icon in the public eye, handsome, charismatic, a true American hero on screen. But behind closed doors, things were different. Former staff recalled his volatile temper and obsessive habits. He had routines no one was allowed to interrupt. He held midnight meetings in the captain's quarters that went on for hours. No one was permitted to clean his personal cabin. More than one crew member had been fired for disobeying. Several had even left voluntarily, claiming they couldn't sleep right on that ship. The deeper Vanessa looked, the more bizarre the stories became. A steward's journal mentioned hearing Latin chants late at night. A ship engineer recorded strange compass malfunctions that only occurred when the Duke was on board. One letter from a former party guest described being locked in a room during a thunderstorm, hearing something scraping along the outside of the hull, even though the ship was docked. Another described a mirror in the main lounge that didn't reflect what was actually in the room. But the most unsettling detail came from a forgotten police report. It had been buried under layers of legal documentation, tucked inside a faded folder. The report noted that the Duke's death had occurred under unusual and unexplained circumstances. Though the official cause was listed as heart failure, the responding officers had found scratch marks on the inside of the cabin door, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The yacht's power had gone out just before the body was discovered, and none of the backup generators engaged. The report also mentioned an antique dagger found on the desk, stained with something too degraded to test. The officers noted an unsettling atmosphere and recommended the room be sealed. It never was. Vanessa was both horrified and fascinated. It wasn't just that the Duke had died mysteriously, it was that there was mounting evidence suggesting he wanted to bind himself to the yacht. She returned to one of the old logs, scanning a line she hadn't noticed before. Dated just 2 days before his death, it read, "I've made my decision. If I can no longer live beyond the screen, I will live beyond the flesh. This ship is mine." He had created a space in which he could exist beyond death, feeding off memories, reclaiming moments, revisiting rooms like a phantom director running endless takes of his final act. The revelation rattled her. It made everything feel more urgent. Every sound, every shadow, every flickering light was no longer just random. It was part of something intentional. A presence with purpose. Vanessa knew she couldn't keep this to herself much longer. But how could she convince Carter, logic-driven, money-obsessed Carter, that the restoration was waking something that didn't want to be disturbed? She couldn't explain why, but she was certain of one thing now: the Duke hadn't died on the ship. He had become it. After uncovering the Duke's obsession with eternal life, Vanessa could no longer pretend what was happening on the yacht was simply superstition or psychological stress. Something was escalating, actively, violently, and with intention. The atmosphere aboard the Majesty had shifted from eerie to oppressive. The air itself felt different, thicker, colder, heavy with static. It was like walking into a room that didn't want you there. The crew began to feel it too. Workers who once brushed off flickering lights or unexplained noises started quitting, some without even collecting their pay. One electrician, Michael, reported seeing someone sitting in the ballroom lounge after hours. When he approached, the figure stood up, faced away from him, and slowly faded into thin air. He resigned the next morning and refused to return, even to pick up his tools. Other incidents followed. One worker was nearly crushed when a chandelier chain snapped without warning, despite having been freshly installed and inspected hours earlier. The fall nearly took his head off, and the event was caught on security footage. The video, oddly, glitched the moment the chain broke. In the still frame before the incident, you could just barely make out a shadow in the background, tall, blurry, and watching. Vanessa was spending more time alone on the yacht now. She felt tethered to it, as if something wanted her specifically to understand what it truly was. And yet, the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. She started waking up at 3:13 a.m. every night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the echo of a deep voice still ringing in her ears. She couldn't remember what it said, only that it felt commanding, demanding, and that it didn't want her to leave. In one of the guest rooms, she found claw marks etched into the inside of the closet door. At first, she assumed it was old damage until she noticed the dust disturbed around the scratches. They were fresh, the edges still sharp. No one else had reported working in that room. The only camera facing the hallway outside had failed to record for 4 hours during the previous night. The final straw came when Vanessa brought her assistant, Grace, aboard to help finalize fabric choices for the staterooms. They had just finished reviewing swatches when Grace excused herself to use the bathroom. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Vanessa went to check, only to find the bathroom door wide open and Grace standing in the middle of the hallway, pale, shaking, staring into one of the porthole windows. When Vanessa touched her shoulder, Grace screamed and collapsed. She came to moments later, sobbing uncontrollably. It took hours for her to explain what she had seen, a reflection in the glass of a man standing behind her, close enough to touch, but when she turned, there had been no one there. Worse, he had whispered her name. And it wasn't just any whisper, it was the voice of the Duke himself. She recognized it immediately from old interviews she'd watched the night before. The voice was clear, confident, and angry. "You don't belong here." Carter, of course, dismissed the incident. "Overactive imagination," he said. "Everyone's just on edge because we're close to launch." But Vanessa was done pretending. She showed him the security footage. She showed him the captain's log. She told him everything she'd uncovered about the rituals, the journal entries, the dark intentions. Carter's expression changed only slightly, but it was enough. She could see doubt creep into his mind. Still, he waved it off, insisting they were too far into the project to stop now. "Ghost stories don't scare investors," he said. "They attract them." But Vanessa knew it wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. Whatever was happening aboard the Majesty wasn't just haunting. It was a takeover. The Duke wasn't content to be remembered. He wanted to be obeyed. He wanted everyone on board to know this was still his kingdom. And he would do whatever it took to make them leave, or worse, to make them stay. Vanessa had reached her limit. The accidents were no longer just unnerving, they were dangerous. And after Grace's terrifying encounter, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just afraid anymore, she was angry. The yacht was becoming more hostile by the day, and no one seemed willing to confront what was truly happening. Not Carter. Not the dwindling crew. Not even the few who still believed in the project. But Vanessa couldn't ignore it. The Duke's spirit wasn't just lingering, he was claiming the ship, bit by bit. So she did something she never thought she'd do. She called in a medium. Her name was Elena Reyes, a renowned spiritual consultant with a background in historical hauntings and psychic trauma. Elena was skeptical about many cases she encountered, but after reviewing Vanessa's findings, the captain's log, the photo, the audio recordings of the unexplained whispers, she agreed to conduct a séance. "This is no residual energy," Elena warned. "This is a conscious entity. Powerful, controlling, and territorial." The séance was scheduled for the following Friday night at 11 p.m. inside the yacht's grand ballroom, the very place where many of the Duke's most notorious parties had once been held. The setting was elegant but cold, with vintage chandeliers overhead and shadows that seemed to cling to the corners of the room. Attending were Elena, Vanessa, Carter, reluctantly, and 2 crew members who had stayed behind out of morbid curiosity. Candles were lit. A circle was drawn. Everyone joined hands, and Elena began the ritual in hushed tones, calling out to the spirit of the Duke, not to provoke, but to invite communication. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, the temperature dropped. Visibly. One of the candles flickered out, and the chandelier began to tremble without a breeze. And then came the voice. Low, gravelly, proud. "Why have you come?" Everyone froze. The voice hadn't come from Elena. It hadn't come from anyone in the circle. It filled the entire room, as if vibrating through the ship's very hull. Elena's hand twitched, and her head tilted back slightly. She exhaled sharply and spoke, but it was no longer her voice. It was deeper. Male. Possessive. "You're trespassing in my home." Vanessa stared in horror as Elena's eyes rolled back, and her mouth curled into a smirk that didn't belong to her. She spoke again, this time in an uncanny imitation of the Duke's voice. "This ship remembers. I remember. And I won't be forgotten." Carter tried to break the circle, but Elena's hands tightened like vices, holding them in place. The windows began to rattle. The floor groaned underfoot. And then Elena, still possessed, looked directly at Vanessa and said, You found me. You brought them. Why are you trying to take what's mine? The chandelier above them snapped a link in its chain and dropped a few inches before catching. One of the crew members screamed and ran. The circle was broken. The candles blew out. And Elena collapsed, gasping for breath, her forehead slick with sweat. Vanessa rushed to her side. Elena blinked rapidly, dazed. He's strong, she whispered. He doesn't want help. He doesn't want release. He chose to stay. The medium explained, once fully recovered, that the Duke had performed binding rituals in the final days of his life. Dark rituals. He had given part of his soul, if not all of it, to the ship. His spirit wasn't stuck by accident. It was trapped by design. A self-made prison. A throne he never intended to leave. Elena offered to try a cleansing ritual, but warned it may not work, not against a spirit so willful, so rooted in his identity. He doesn't see himself as dead, she said. He believes this is still his domain. Vanessa left the séance more certain than ever. The restoration was a mistake. Every day they spent resurrecting the Duke's yacht was like feeding him, reviving him. The more beautiful the ship became, the stronger he grew. And worse, she was starting to feel like he had chosen her. Not just as an intruder, but as a participant. He knew her name. He spoke through someone else to reach her directly. He had begun following her in dreams, whispering things she could never remember upon waking. But she felt them. Felt him. The Duke didn't just want his ship back. He wanted company. Elena returned to the Majesty the following night with a plan. She had consulted old maritime superstition texts and spiritual cleansing rites, many of which dated back to the 1800s. With Vanessa's help, she prepared for a full purification ritual: incense, salt lines, protective symbols drawn with chalk across the floorboards, and ancient prayers meant to sever spiritual ties between a place and a lingering soul. The goal wasn't to banish the Duke, she explained. It was to give him a final chance to leave in peace. But Elena didn't understand one crucial detail. He didn't want to go. The cleansing began in the captain's quarters, the heart of the ship, where the Duke had died. The team, now reduced to just Elena, Vanessa, and Carter, moved slowly through the space. Vanessa carried a bundle of sage. Carter reluctantly handled a candle and bell. Elena chanted in a low, steady voice. The room grew colder with each verse. The flame flickered, then flared. The chalk symbols started to smudge on their own. One even vanished right before Vanessa's eyes. Elena suddenly stopped and gasped. He's here, she whispered. Right here. Carter scoffed. That's what he wants us to think. At that exact moment, a mirror above the desk shattered violently. Not cracked, exploded. Shards flew across the room, slicing Carter's arm. He stumbled back in shock, blood seeping through his sleeve. That wasn't the ship, he muttered. That was him. They barely made it out of the room before the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The hallway lights began to surge one by one until all of them burst in a synchronized flash. The ship groaned, a deep, metallic bellow like something breathing through rusted lungs. Vanessa could hear something behind the walls, like pacing or footsteps dragging slowly from one room to the next. Elena tried to continue the ritual in the ballroom, the last major space on their list. She lit new candles, threw salt across the entryway, and began chanting again. But this time, her voice faltered. She paused and looked at Vanessa with wide eyes. He's inside, she whispered. Inside what? Carter asked. Elena didn't answer. Her gaze locked onto Vanessa. Not what, she said softly. Who? Vanessa's stomach twisted. She staggered backward as a sharp, ice-cold pressure pressed against her chest. It felt like a hand, fingers curling, gripping, squeezing. She couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred. In that moment, she felt him. His rage. His possessiveness. His jealousy. He didn't want her gone. He wanted her trapped, just like him. A companion. A successor. Maybe even a vessel. Carter lunged and pulled her back. The pressure snapped like a rubber band and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Elena grabbed her arm and dragged her to the exit as the ballroom doors slammed shut behind them with a thunderous crash. The ritual had failed. And worse, it had provoked him. After that night, everything changed. The crew officially disbanded. Carter was sued by 2 former workers for psychological trauma. Elena refused to ever return. She told Vanessa bluntly, "This place is no longer just haunted," it's claimed. "You can't cleanse what doesn't want to be released." The media got wind of the chaos. Headlines read, "Billionaire's haunted yacht project falls apart, and the Duke still sails alone." But no one really knew what had happened on board, only rumors, half-truths, and a growing legend. Vanessa withdrew from public life for several months. She kept her journals hidden, her sketches locked away. But at night, she still dreamed of the ship. She could feel the waves rocking beneath her feet, hear the Duke's voice whispering in her ear. And always, just before waking, she'd see herself walking the deck, not as a visitor, but as a resident. Wearing his jacket, smoking his cigar. The ship was docked, permanently sealed off, and declared inaccessible due to structural hazards. But no one really believed that. Locals began reporting strange lights at night, shadows moving across the upper deck, music playing from nowhere, the sound of heavy boots pacing along the bow. Some claimed you could hear a man laughing when the wind blew just right. They say the Duke never left his yacht. They say he never planned to. 73.